مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. كان الإنجاز الأهم للرئيس أوباما على الصعيد الداخلي نظام تأمين صحي قومي جديد يوفر لكل أمريكي خيارا للرعاية الطبية. كان كذلك أقوى شعار التف حوله أنصار دونالد ترامب الذي أعاد إصلاح نظام الرعاية الصحية توسعا هائلا في سيطرة الحكومة وخطوة شيطانية نحو شيوعية على الطراز الأوروبي. في واقع الأمر انتخب رجل الأعمال النيويوركي بناء على وعد منه بإبطال العمل بإصلاح أوباما لنظام الرعاية الصحية واستبداله ببديل أكثر محافظة بكثير. بعد مرور 6 أشهر على توليه للرئاسة انهارت تلك الاستراتيجية. ربما يسيطر الجمهوريون على البيت الأبيض وكلام مجلسي الكونغرس، ولكن لم يكفي هذا لضمان إقرار خطة الرئيس. كيف حدث هذا؟ هل سيكون هناك بديل جمهوري جديد للرعاية الصحية؟ أم هل سيتحرك الرئيس ترامب في اتجاه جديد فيما يخص السياسة الداخلية؟ لمناقشة السياسة والجوانب السياسية وراء فشل الإصلاح الجمهوري للرعاية الصحية، يسرني أن أرحب بلجنتنا التي تضم الخبيرين السياسيين نور مورنستين وستيف كليمنتس. Welcome back to Dakhil Washington. Today we're talking about healthcare. Healthcare in America, healthcare is a national priority, and the debacle of the effort to reform of our healthcare system. Today, Norm, Steve, thank you for joining us. Now, why is healthcare, again, at the top of our national political agenda? It's been there for years. Why is it there again now?
So it has been there for decades, actually. It's a difficult thing to resolve when you have what's moving towards 1/5 of the economy, and any changes you make bring disruptions. Large numbers of people are happy with what they've got, in part because they've never gotten really sick, and making changes is difficult. But now what we have is the last massive effort to make changes, the most significant in at least 50 years, the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, was bitterly opposed by all Republicans, and after it was enacted, they moved to delegitimize it and promised over and over and over again to repeal it completely, take it all away, and replace it. They had no replacement plan, and now it's clear if you simply repeal, you throw the entire country into turmoil. The Republicans want to do this with only their votes, and they don't have the votes to make it happen.
So just to remind, the Democrats did what they did only with their votes, and now the Republicans want to do what they want with only their votes, but they don't have them.
But there's another point here, which is that Democrats wanted Republican input, and Republicans strategically decided that they wanted to divorce themselves entirely from the process and make it illegitimate. Republicans don't want input from Democrats, and that's making it more difficult.
I think one of the interesting and most sad things about healthcare is that there's a debate in the country right now on whether healthcare is a privilege or healthcare is a right. And there, in the healthcare debate that has emerged, as Norm just said, not only has it become politically polarized, but it has become something where people feel as if you provide more healthcare for others in need, which would ultimately lead to a healthier system, better behaviors, people showing up to work, more wellness within the community, that all of those would have great net positives for the economy and the future of the country. But some people in the system now look at that as a cost that takes away from them. And so it's become one of the most polarized debates because people think they're going to lose, that the erosion of their quality of life is endangered, is proceeding because we're having a debate where some that have been left out of the system and they don't want to share, they don't want to open that up. And that is really, I think, an outrageous and challenging problem for this country right now.
So let's put this again in a little bit of context. What was President Trump's position on this issue throughout the campaign? how high a priority was it for him throughout the campaign?
Well, he through the campaign, he did what Republicans, what Norm just said, which was to say no to anything with Obama attached to it. So through the campaign, he kept talking about what a failure Obamacare was, what a disaster it was, and was without detail and without any nuance or any true understanding of how the healthcare system was functioning. Donald Trump savaged the concept and the naming and the branding of Obamacare. But what he didn't bring, and we've seen this in the president's own approach to this, his own discussions with Republican counterparts, where he seems to not know very much about the very details and the structure of the healthcare debate itself. So he went after a brand and is knocking down that brand. And in the meantime, millions, tens of millions of Americans may suffer drastic consequences because of this debate.
So Donald Trump has made life much more miserable on this set of issues for Republicans in Congress. During the campaign, he promised, guaranteed, that everybody would have much better insurance for much less money, and that he was not going to touch Medicaid or Medicare, the two big government programs. He was going to leave those alone. Well, the plans of Republicans in Congress do exactly the opposite. They take insurance away from large numbers of people, and they basically eviscerate the Medicaid program. And now in the Republican budget, they want to go after Medicare and Social Security. So Trump was giddy when the House passed a bill that violated every one of his promises because it was a victory. And he did a ceremony in the Rose Garden and did high fives to people. And then when the Senate balked at that bill, he met with leaders in Congress and called it a mean bill, the same bill that he had celebrated before. So they don't know where to take all of this, and it's not like he's providing guidance. When the Affordable Care Act was under debate, Barack Obama would go to the Hill, and he had encyclopedic knowledge of the different elements and could work with them to try and make some of that happen. This is a president who doesn't have a knowledge base and messes it up for them.
I mean, isn't it a legitimate critique to say, well, Trump promises things, can't deliver. Obama promised things, can't deliver. There were lots of statements made throughout the whole healthcare discussion a decade ago.
But Obama knew what he was promising and not delivering. And so the problem with Donald Trump...
Which is a worse sin, to purposefully not deliver?
Well, I mean, I try to sometimes put myself in the shoes of a Republican congressman today, and it's a very hard situation to be in. And if you're going to stand up for principle at some point, and the head of your party in the White House doesn't, seems to be able to, on a single day, give 3 different positions, either on immigration policy or healthcare policy, and so I think someone described him as a compass sitting next to a magnet that's constantly spinning. And in that creates a tornado around some of these Republican congressmen where they don't know where leadership is. And so hopefully what people will do, and I think Norm and I have talked about this before, I think he's more doubtful than I am, is that people will step back and figure out how do they begin containing the presidency and begin putting principled thought into smart public policy that they can put on the table. Since the president seems to be immune to any particular guidance, perhaps they can hijack the president as opposed to the president hijacking them.
But there are smart people on Capitol Hill.
Yes.
The Speaker of the House is a smart man. The Senate Majority Leader is a smart legislator. Why haven't these leaders been able to produce legislation? I mean, the president doesn't really care about the details, as you both said. No. Why can't they produce legislation that garners enough votes to pass?
So here's the reality. First, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was built on Republican principles. It was basically structured around what Republicans had come up with as an alternative to the Clinton health plan back in the 90s. It was these exchanges, private insurers competing in a marketplace and a defined marketplace. It was to broaden the risk pool of people in insurance by having an individual mandate. There were all these principles that they put into their bill, and when Republicans decided strategically to say, this is terrible, all of it, we need to pull it out root and branch, they were left with nothing. They spent 8 years attacking and voting to repeal and never came up with a plan. And when Senator Pat Toomey, a Republican from Pennsylvania, was asked a week ago or so, well, why didn't you come up with a plan till now? You're just slapping it together. He said, well, we really didn't think Donald Trump was going to win. So it was all, if it's Clinton, we'll just oppose. And they created a box canyon for themselves because anything they come out with now is going to eliminate some of the promises that they themselves have made and that their own voters expect to be there.
Norm said something so important that's often misunderstood in this healthcare debate, is that the Obama plan really did incorporate and bring in many of the principles of Republican plans. This was not what you call a single player, socialized system. Everyone's in, like you would see in France or Canada or the UK. That was what the Democrats years ago, that's where the Democratic left kind of wanted in the healthcare debate. And Obama assiduously put the deal on healthcare where the Republicans were. And so they're actually opposing their own principles. And I completely agree with Norm that that's created a problem that they've got nowhere to go, except catastrophe, actually.
So if you were in a quiet moment to sit with the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader and ask them, is there a solution here? Can you envision a Republican plan that would get majority support? Would they say no, it just doesn't exist?
What Paul Ryan would tell you is, well, we got the votes for a plan, and it's that Senate, that awful Senate, and that's a phenomenon we've seen before where the House and Senate don't agree. But I think if Ryan were being completely candid, he would tell you that it's going to be very difficult for them to pull something together. And one of their problems, to be frank here, is they have not been all that interested in solving the health care issue. They want to fend off constituents who believe that they were going to repeal this bill, but this is a bill to get a tax cut. And it's paying for the tax cut by cutting Medicaid and other monies out of the healthcare system. And you could get a better bill if you didn't cut the money out of the healthcare system. But then you couldn't get your tax cut. And what Paul Ryan's been saying a lot in the last week is healthcare is very difficult. We can't pull the forces together because we have differences. But on tax cuts, we're all on the same page. And they want to pivot to the tax cuts and have this issue go away for now.
One other element, though, that we haven't really hit on yet is just how divided, we've talked about it with you and other shows, and Norm knows so well, are the factions within the Republican Party seem to be in it. We see this in the healthcare debate right now in the United States Senate, where you have Susan Collins, who's saying we can't cut back a major benefit to Americans, from Senator from Maine. We can't cut Medicaid. We can't have this side debate on something so significant and important to the American people. And so she's on that side of making sure that there aren't too many cuts. Then you have another part of the opposition, Rand Paul from Kentucky and Mike Lee from Utah, who are on the more libertarian side, who are opposed to any subsidies, any government involvement. So the problem is, when you look at those two wings, these two wings can't agree with each other. And when you have just 52 Republican seats in the United States Senate, and right now you've got a lot of pressure there, the votes aren't there to kind of bring those wings in. And I think it's equally true in a different way in the House, where the Freedom Caucus that we've discussed before has held their party hostage, and it makes it very, very hard for leadership, whether it was Speaker Ryan or his predecessor, John Boehner, who was Speaker of the House, to pull these divergent wings of their own party together. It's not Democrats versus Republicans, it's Republicans versus Republicans.
Okay. When we come back, I'm going to ask you what all this debacle means for healthcare, for the Republicans, and for other legislative agenda for the Trump administration in just a moment. Again, today our panel of political experts includes Norman Ornstein. Norm is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, an election analyst for CBS News, and a contributor to the National Journal and Atlantic Magazine. His book is called It's Even Worse Than It Looks: How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. Sitting to Norm's left is Steve Clemons. Steve is Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic and editor of Atlantic Live. He's also a senior fellow and founder of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation, a prominent think tank here in Washington. Steve writes and speaks frequently about the Washington political scene, foreign policy, and national security issues. So, gentlemen, let's take as a given for a moment the idea that there will be no new reform of healthcare. So what does that mean for our healthcare system? Does it just stay as it is? The president has said it's going to collapse.
And he's already taking steps to undermine it. But the president, who has said some very bizarre things on Twitter and elsewhere, almost gleefully that people will die and horrible things will happen, and then Democrats, because they own the Affordable Care Act, will come crawling to him and let him do whatever he wants, is not a reflection of a reality. The reality now, among other things we know from several surveys, is Republicans having all the branches of government, Americans believe that they're in charge of the healthcare system. And most Republicans in Congress do not want to see chaos in the healthcare system because that will work against their own interests. So there's a chance, at least, if nothing gets done, and it's possible they can still put something together, but if nothing gets done, then you'll see Democrats and Republicans sit down and do something to stabilize the insurance markets so that we can keep the current system moving as they go back and try and come up with a plan B. But it's entirely possible along the way, because there are many things an administration can do to cut back on payments. They're already spending some of the money that's supposed to go to encouraging people to have insurance to push people off of insurance. They can bring some chaos.
I think it's going to be a storm that we see, that the truth is that you've got some places where insurance markets have stabilized, where you see healthy stakeholders, you've got smart state governments working, and you've got an insurance set of options that's working. And those seem to be more resilient to, Trump's desire to see the entire system fall and wreck. But there are places where he is going to try to strong-arm the starving of markets and try to precipitate a collapse, if you will, in some places. So I think you're going to have a mixed situation, and you're going to see a lot of trauma out there and uncertainty in the American public. You're going to see some people go to states, try to move to states, try to become parts of other systems, and in that you're going to see, I think, a lot of confusion politically, and this will have been caused by the President of the United States going to war with the health care of people in the United States that have it right now. And I don't know how that's going to play out politically. I think most people would say that's a pretty stupid thing to do, and that the pressure, I'll tell you, Senator Joe Manchin, who's probably the most conservative member of the Democratic Party, had a very good statement on this. He says, people may not remember who gave them health care, how they got health care, but they'll remember who took it away. And I think that's absolutely right. And so it's an interesting challenge right now, but it's going to be very muddy and very uneven around the country.
So what is this crisis, this upheaval do to everything else that President Trump wants to do? I mean, healthcare may be high on the agenda, but it's not the only item on the president's agenda.
I mean, I'd love to hear Norm's take, but my quick take is, I think this president has not moved successfully any legislation at all. It's unlike any other presidency that we have seen in the modern era. And I don't see that conditions of that improving at all. So when you look across infrastructure or tax reform, healthcare, education, whatever it may be, you don't see the president able to lead on anything. We may be into this administration and see at the end of it zero significant legislative achievements, zero. And I don't see this situation as helping any of these others. And what's likely to happen, because some of the president's other problems and challenges, is that you end up seeing a shift away from the domestic morass and the paralysis of the system to international problems that I think that's a worrisome combination. When you have a toxic political paralysis, sometimes presidents find small countries to bomb.
So it is very difficult for them to get much done. President Trump lives in his own world, and he has said repeatedly, I've had the most successful record as a new president ever, maybe a little bit behind Franklin Roosevelt. The numbers show that that's a lie. Basically, he's passed fewer bills than most of his predecessors in the time that we've been alive, and the bills that he's passed or he's signed that have come through Congress are almost all minor ones that don't do much. There's no significant accomplishment. As time goes by, if we don't get any of those, he's going to get more frustrated and they're going to get more antsy. Now, they want to make a big push on tax reform, which is mostly to get tax cuts for the rich. That is the one thing, as Paul Ryan said, that unifies them. And they want that money in part so that the billionaires will give them money back in return for their campaigns. But it's a tough road to get that. They want an infrastructure package. The administration does. The conservatives, who see this as big government spending, don't particularly want that. There's Democratic support for that, but you'd have to do it in the right way. And I think Steve is right. The focus is going to turn away from getting things through Congress. There's a lot that he's doing in the regulatory arena because he's able to pick people for his cabinet on climate change and energy policy, on communications policy and the Federal Communications Commission. Through regulations, he can affect the policy process quite significantly. He is having success at getting judges in, and that's going to convert the judicial system in a sharply conservative, even radical direction. But most everything else, the normal ways in which we judge presidential success, not much.
Okay, well, fascinating. We'll come back and revisit this issue as we get closer to next year's election. Thank you very much for joining us in this episode of داخل Washington.
Thank you.
بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول قوى الأحزاب السياسية الأميركية، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.